why my people do not speak our language today in the way that we should. The reasons are complex and compound.
Language really is the code of thinking. It is really the framework on how we see the world. And so if you can transform the coding of how people think, it's a lot easier to transform them to becoming so-called great, good American citizens.
If you could take that away from this new generation, when they become the adults, right, they'll be indoctrinated in a particular way.
We don't know what the Hawaiian Kingdom was. So today, when we speak about language, it's void of a country perspective. It's rather spoken to as if it's a native culture. It's spoken to as if only the natives have that culture. That's because we've been denationalized, and contemporary scholarship has manipulated the history of the Hawaiian Kingdom as if it was always controlled by the foreigner.
It is so untrue, and it's so easy to deconstruct just with the historical documents.
If they were in control during that whole time, why did they have to overthrow themselves in 1893?
See, not knowing is one thing, but thinking you know as they taught you to know, that's even worse.
That's the danger, and that's the power of that false narrative, of that story we've been fed, of that story we've bought into.
With research that is being done now, we are now uncovering these issues that are undermining and rebuking what we thought in the Kingdom era. And that's where we're starting to find out that the Kingdom era was agency.
We give away so much that is ours. This is where all of these things were preserved in law. That's the magic right there. One of the biggest things we don't realize, this is ours. And the story we've been fed is, this is not yours. Your history is not yours. The missionaries gave you law. The missionaries gave you private property. Private property is not yours. Law is not yours. If I'm the United States of America, I want you to believe Hawaiian Kingdom law is not yours. I want you to believe that international law is not yours, because then I never have to answer those questions.
It's not just a matter of learning some Hawaiian words or doing some Hawaiian arts and crafts. It's really about really understanding what our true history is. What is our true history?
Hawaii's history is pretty incredible.
English language actually was introduced to Hawaii when Captain Cook arrived.
Every single one of them, to a T, talks about how Hawaii is farmed beyond anywhere in the Pacific. You could not grow anything more on this land. Hawaiians got this agriculture thing down. Their lo'i, their system of irrigation, land is as productive as can be.
And then you start to see the influx of people coming to Hawaii because of what Captain Cook did, which was map the Pacific. Now ships could find Hawaii, and it became the crossroads of many ships coming through, and also many different languages. But the language here was Hawaiian. It was a native language. That's the national language.
By the time those who follow Cook, because there is a lapse, the kingdom is pretty well unified. Vancouver's here, and he registers that 2 of the chiefs in Kamehameha's court won't leave the ship. They just keep hanging out by the guy who's doing the ledgers. They could see that magic. I mean, it's a technology. I can write something down, give it to you, you give it to him, and he knows what I want. But there's nobody to teach it until the missionaries come. 1820, he lets them, you can talk about your religion, but that's not their great interest. Their great interest from the time the missionaries landed was writing and sewing. The other thing is, Hawaiians had already been interacting with the Western world for 40 years. So when Ka'ahumanu, meets up with missionaries, she's had foreigners in her life for most of her adult life. So they teach her reading and writing. It takes 1.5 years for Hawaiian to be knocked down to a spelling system. They finish it in January of 1822. I have letters from Ka'ahumanu in more beautiful handwriting than you'll ever do. In June of 1822. The first letter that I have from her, she's writing to Kamamalu, who is the queen that dies in London with Liholiho a few years later. And she's saying, I got your letter, but there's 3 of us, I only got 1 letter. I want plenty letters. I want 800 letters. She goes, you're with the Longnecks. Get some help on this. She says, we want the teaching of literacy. This will make us wise. I mean, this is one of the highest, most powerful chiefs in the kingdom, and just deciding we want this. And that motivation just moves right from there, straightforward. Kauikeoli, when he comes to the throne, announces mine will be a nation of literacy. And he doesn't just say it, he's already literate. So he's not saying, we must aspire. He's saying, I want to share this. Everybody takes pride in learning to read and write. It becomes a national project.
In 1846, there's a law that states that children are mandated to go to school. So school is compulsory in Hawaii. Children at that time are being educated in Hawaiian. Everybody who's in Hawaii, whether you're Hawaiian or not, is going to a Hawaiian school.
But there was a great interest, and a lot of Hawaiians were learning English and other languages. Actually, you have Hawaiians who are fluent in German, who are fluent in Chinese, because of the interaction of the world. And a lot of the high-level positions in the government had to be given to English speakers, oftentimes foreigners, because the interaction was so critical to national continuity. Hawaiians' critique of how come so many foreigners in the government. And the government wrote back, the king wrote back saying, we have to have that interface. Until we can improve the body of folk that we can draw from, we have to use these people. So there's a move within the population to improve the body you can draw from.
Well, the public schools ended up not becoming English immersion schools, but private schools became English immersion, established by the chiefs. Iolani, St. Andrew's Priory, Puno created by the missionaries though, Kamehameha schools. These were English immersion schools. It's not that they were trying to weed out the native language or ban the native language.
That's organic societal shift. Hawaiian is still the language of the kingdom.
Queen Emma, when she starts at the first Anglican school in Lahaina, Maui, she insists the Hawaiian students learn English. Nowadays, sometimes we think of those two languages as English is the bad language and Hawaiian is the good language, because English has supplanted Hawaiian. But in the 1860s and 70s and so forth, Hawaiians saw English as a tool to engage the world with, to be bilingual. No one thought Hawaiian was going to disappear. Learning English gave you that much more of an education.
There's a quest to become really citizens of the globe.
Of course, that was the foundation for the educational system that was emerging at that time, and also the body of literature that began to be produced at that point in time. And of course, this is happening through, the first printing press, of course, up at Lahaina Luna.
The first newspapers are founded in 1834, just for the Teachers College, but the whole nation wants them. So that kicks off, the newspapers become this venue. There are English language newspapers, there's Chinese, there's Portuguese language newspapers. Hawaii is a multi-racial nation. Hawaiian is the main language of the nation.
Throughout the 1840s, you see this sort of bloom of Hawaiian literacy.
Families and children, they would circle up around the table and read the newspaper together.
You start in 1850 getting reports out. For those who can't read and write, and where would you find them? Everyone, every taro farmer and diplomat can read and write in at least Hawaiian. A generation in, you have almost universal literacy.
The literacy rate in the U.S. at the time was about 73%. In Hawaii, it was well over 90%.
By the 1850s, and especially 1861, now newspapers become a commercial endeavor, and it's wide open. They rely on their readership to fill them. So it becomes a nexus for everybody to express their opinion. It becomes the place to download information.
And they weren't just literate, they were engaged. People wrote in and said, I want to see this done by the government.
We were reading about what was happening all over the world. Cinderella and all kinds of Western classics that were translated and put in our newspapers too. So what it shows us is that the worldview of our people throughout the kingdom period was very broad.
There are 100 different newspapers, sometimes 2, 3, 5 at the same time. Some of them only ran for 6 months. One of them ran for 70 years. Some of them were 8 pages, most of them were 4 pages, but the size of the Wall Street Journal. By 1860, there's been a number of plagues that came through, and they realized that the knowledgeable people dying is like a library burning down. So in the newspapers, you get people writing in and saying, those of you who are knowledgeable, write it down. It'll be safe here.
So many of the mo'olelo that we have today, Umi and Keku Haupi'o and Pele and Hi'iaka, they're sort of published like how soap operas sort of feed you a piece every day where, you have to read the next one in order to get the next piece and so on and so forth.
The written archive of Hawaiian language is maybe the largest archive of indigenous writings in the world.
We found a chant composed by Kamehameha I for the birth of his second son, Kauikeoli. Well, nobody even knew he had ever composed anything.
We've been able to compile these massive mo'olelo by mining our Hawaiian language newspapers.
We have 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspapers, this size newspapers. It comes out to about 1 million 8x11 size sheets of Hawaiians writing about Hawaii.
It's the window into another world.
We have tens of thousands of Hawaiian language documents, legal documents, letters from pastors to the king, letters from the maka'inana to the king, and so forth. We have a nation speaking about who they are and what they were, and we've never listened to them.
But it was that Aboriginal population that built the current infrastructure that we still use today. So that meant that the judiciary spoke Hawaiian, the bicameral legislative assembly spoke Hawaiian, the executive branch spoke Hawaiian, the cabinet spoke Hawaiian, the Department of Education spoke Hawaiian, the fire department spoke Hawaiian, the police department spoke, right? So you had a somewhat modern, vibrant, progressive country in which a multi-ethnic national population was speaking Hawaiian.
It's a very diverse population. Hawaiians make up the majority all the way through.
About that 120-year span, we go from being one of the most literate people on the face of this earth to one of the most illiterate.
You have a complete replacement. You have a complete flip from all Hawaiian to all English. By the time Hawaii becomes a state, 0 Hawaiian language newspapers. Is that a coincidence?
And that has to do with the political history of Hawaii, more so than social organic change. The Hawaiian language record opens up that story in a way that has not been accessible for 100 years.
The kind of diplomacy that you see Hawaiians putting forth in the 19th century are survival strategies, right? No longer could we use the spear to win wars, right? Now we realize that in order to survive in what's becoming a globalized world, right, we're gonna need to learn how to be very diplomatic.
But he holds weekly seminars with the king and all of his ruling chiefs. But we're talking a year, and he wants to know, how are all these other countries running their show?